Hi, when I was 19 years old, I went off to join the Navy. And I went to naval college down on the south coast of England. And I arrived there very young, very fresh. And I was told that I was going to be sharing a cabin for the next 15 weeks through basic training with an Omani. Now, I didn't know anyone from Oman. I didn't know anyone from the Middle East. But I assumed that he wouldn't be as dedicated, he wouldn't be as motivated, and he wouldn't be as hardworking as me and my colleagues. What actually happened was I shared a cabin with someone that was extremely capable, highly professional, and very motivated. And he showed me up. And I would be working till 2 o'clock in the morning, polishing my shoes, ironing my shirts while he was sleeping. And it taught me a lesson. It taught me a lesson that a lot of the stereotypes that you hear about the Middle East, about the people in the Middle East, are not necessarily correct. And you need to challenge those. So today, I would like to talk to you about that and try and change your mind and some of your perceptions about the Middle East. My name is Kyle Boag. I'm the Regional Head of International Subsidiary Banking for HSBC. For those of you that don't know HSBC, we're an international bank with operations throughout the world. We have a very strong position in the Middle East, and I travel frequently across the countries. The subject for my talk is young, rich, and restless, disruption in the Middle East. I just want to talk through each of those. The first thing, young. What's young about the Middle East? Well, the countries for a start. The average age of the countries in the Gulf is 55 years. That's not old when you compare it to the developed world. So a lot of these countries are still emerging. They're emerging from a colonial past. They're emerging, they're developing their own structures, their own policies, and they're quite young. So that's something to bear in mind when you're going there. From a population perspective, the median age across the Middle East is 29 years of age. You compare that with the US, which is at 38. So you have a young population, a population who is more acquainted with the technological advances that we've seen, and some that are probably more open to changes and more open to the international world. And the countries are not burdened with the structures that we have. They're not burdened by the infrastructure that a lot of more developed countries have. They don't have to take the same progression that we've taken in terms of technology and in case of infrastructure development. And rich. Why are the countries rich? Why is the Middle East rich? And it's one of the things, if you say about the Middle East, people straight away think of money, they think of wealth. Well, the countries are very wealthy. In case of GDP, all the countries in the Gulf area have a GDP per head which is higher than the United Kingdom. And in some cases they are, I think the richest by per capita head country in the world is Qatar. But they're also wealthy in other ways. They're wealthy in resources, oil and gas. The biggest oil and gas reserves are in that region. But also there's mineral wealth there. There's opportunities for mining. There are natural resources which they haven't even tapped into yet. They're also rich in terms of location, strategically placed between Asia, Europe, and Africa. And the Middle East, and specifically the UAE, has developed itself as a hub to support trade in the rest of the region. The biggest port in the world outside of Asia is in the Middle East. And if you look from a logistic point of view, 3 of the largest international airlines are all based within a 30-mile radius in the Gulf area. The population are also wealthy. So if you look at the structure there, it's around creating capital. So there's no income tax in most countries. People accumulate wealth and then reinvest that into businesses. Companies looking to set up in the region frequently have to have a local partner. That local partner will help with the development of that business, again, grow capital, which they then need to reinvest. In terms of investable assets, there are 3 trillion across the Middle East, and that's expected to grow by 7%. Now, that gives people capital which they can invest into projects, they can invest into companies, they can invest into development. They are also rich in terms of education. So the countries have invested quite heavily in their education systems. And if you look at the education systems across the Gulf area, they are all above the world average. And this isn't something that they're resting on. They're continuing to develop that and trying to attract talent and attract in good education and good institutions to help improve their education. The countries are also very wealthy in terms of the cultural mix, so huge expat populations. And it's one of the things I really value about the region is that you have people from all over the world who come in, highly motivated people who come there to help grow businesses and help to bring their expertise. And that's something that's incredibly important when you're looking to improve and change your economies. And it's not just a case of what they have now, what is going to be available in the future, it's also what they've invested already. So there's a huge amount of infrastructure spend that has already taken place. The UAE in the decade up to 2021 will have invested 1.3 trillion in infrastructure. And anybody who has been to Dubai, if you look at the building and construction that has taken place over a relatively short period of time, it is very impressive. So I'm trying to paint you a picture of countries which are young, have potential, have aspiration, that have the resources to do that. So where do they go next? And this comes to Restless. So there's been a lot of things that have happened in the last few years. Probably the biggest impact that has affected the region is oil prices. With the huge oil price drop, it has caused a fiscal deficit in a lot of the countries. Now, this doesn't mean that they can't produce oil at an economic rate. What it means is that they don't have the funds available to carry on with the projects that they've had before. And that's been a wake-up call for a lot of the countries. They now realize that they have to diversify their economy away from oil and gas. They need to look at other industries, they need to look at and they need to change their economies. Now, each of them is approaching it in a different way, and they've all put together strategic plans in terms of how they will do it. The one I would highlight is in Saudi Arabia, the Vision 2030. Vision 2030 is a very bold project, which is to look at how they change society. They move away from oil and gas. They privatize a lot of their industries. They try to enter sectors and focus on sectors they haven't before in terms of tourism, in terms of logistics. And if anyone is in here before, the previous speaker talked about the Belt and Roads. Vision 2030 is Belt and Road for Saudi Arabia. It is a transformational project. So there's a lot of economic change, there are a lot of things that they want to do in terms of developing their economies. Some have already been very successful in this. The UAE is probably the most diversified and is already progressing well down that route. There's also a lot of social change. People realize that a lot of the norms that have existed before can't continue. There is a real feeling, a real need for change. Again, using Saudi Arabia as an example, you have heard in the press about women being allowed to drive. You've also heard recently that cinemas have opened up for the first time in 30 years. Now, these may sound, strange to you that, these rules were in place in the first place, but these changes are monumental for the country because it is signaling a change. It's signaling a change in focus, a move away from a lot of the traditional values that existed. They're also focusing, as I mentioned before, on education, improving the education of their people, improving the quality of education they get and the availability of education. They're also trying to improve employment. So traditionally, they had plans to try and get local population, into jobs, for them to, benefit from a lot of the multinationals that had come into the country. You've stepped this up again, and we're now seeing more focus on improving the quality of employment and the level of employment that exists in the indigenous populations. And with the way that they're changing business, creating more joint ventures, it's more of a partnership than it ever has been before, with people coming to work in companies and learn from that. I'd also like to talk about the technological disruption. There is a perception that the Middle East is traditional and that it doesn't adopt technology at the same rate that we see in the West. Again, I would challenge this. If you look at the digital consumer, the levels of digital consumerism in the Middle East, I would talk about the UAE and Saudi and Bahrain and Qatar, is actually some of the highest in the world. And the social media usage across the region is higher than it is in the US. The Twitter penetration in Saudi Arabia is the highest in the world. And the UAE has more LinkedIn profiles per head of capita than anywhere else in the world. So this is a region that is very keen to adopt and use these technologies. If you look at the UAE, which has tried to badge itself as a technological centre for the region, they are looking to invest into drone taxis. They're developing Hyperloop trains to move cargo from the port to the new airport. And also they've set up a bold ambition to actually 3D print 25% of their buildings by 2030. Now these are, they're bold statements, they attract attention, but actually underlying the countries want to do that. And anyone that attended the blockchain presentation earlier will hear that they've said that they want to put all government documents in the UAE onto blockchain by 2020. And these are very bold statements, but actually they have the resources to do this. They have a scale at the moment, which means it's manageable and that they can do it. So why am I telling you this? What's in it for you? What's in it for your companies and your organizations? What I would say is that the best guide you can have is someone that's been there before. So if you want to develop your industry, if you want to develop in a particular sector, the best way that you can do that is to partner with someone who's already done it somewhere before, someone that has that expertise and can work with you to do it. Now, how you do that can vary greatly. It can be you can go in there and work as a multinational to support these countries. You can also do joint ventures. I would highlight, one of my customers in Saudi Arabia is looking at purchasing some assets which the state is selling, and they're going to partner with a US multinational to do that because they need your expertise to support them with their local knowledge to actually make it work. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity and it's a fantastic time in the Middle East as they start to look at how they move away from a very traditional oil-based economy and then refocus themselves onto a more diverse economy, focusing on different industries. So to conclude, I do think that it's an exciting time in the region. People tend to overlook the Middle East, focusing on all the changes that are happening in Asia, the exciting things that are happening in Europe, but there is a lot happening there, which will create great opportunities for you and your businesses. And HSBC, we are across the region, and we're also here in Denver. I'm Jason Huck and his team, and we are happy to help you take that first step or support you as you look to diversify into the region. Thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Do we have any questions?
Thank you.
Hi.
You seem to have defined the Middle East as the Gulf.
Yes.
So I guess my question is the country with the highest growth, the most investable assets, and the highest technological prowess is Israel. Do you have operation there or any insight
The group has operations in Israel, but from our perspective, we manage it just the Middle East separately from that.